By noon, my personal files were backed up, my client contacts discreetly informed, and a few key relationships reinforced with coffee meetings and promises of future collaboration. Some were shocked I was leaving. Others weren't. Those were the ones who mattered, the ones who could read between lines, the ones who knew that when someone like me was pushed out, it wasn't the end of a story. It was the beginning of a new one. I spent the afternoon going over everything one more time. I didn't rush. I wanted to enjoy it, the quiet before the storm. Every signature, every click, every final note in the project management tool was a closing door, but also a locked one behind me. I wasn't leaving anything they could use. At 5:47 p.m., I clicked send on a scheduled email. It would go out at 9 a.m. Friday morning. The subject line was simple: transparency. It contained a carefully crafted breakdown, screenshots, audio clips, memos, nothing emotional, nothing slanderous, just facts, timelines, quotes, the kind of evidence that doesn't scream. It whispers credibility. It spoke not just of my termination, but of patterns, of misuse, of optics-driven decisions that broke the trust of clients and compromised the company's future. It wasn't revenge, it was accountability. At 6:10 p.m., I stood in the doorway of my office, took one last look, and flipped off the light. I wasn't sad. I was ready. Let Vincent drink his champagne and smirk in his glass reflections. By the time he read that email, by the time the board saw what I'd laid out and the clients began calling, he'd realize he should have fired someone else. Want to continue from here? Or want to spin this into something else, a longer piece, a screenplay, a pitch? I filed everything away. At 5:59 p.m., I opened my personal drive. Tucked in a secure, encrypted folder was everything I had spent the past 2 months building, a detailed audit of Vincent's financial activity within the company. Let me be clear. I hadn't gone digging out of revenge. I stumbled upon it, by accident. 2 months earlier, I was working late, reviewing budget reallocations for our expansion project in Singapore. Vincent had made some strange adjustments. Large sums rerouted through shell vendors. It didn't add up. It was sloppy. I had questions. The next morning, I asked him about it. He brushed me off with a wave of his hand. Just streamlining. Expenses, he said. Don't worry about it. But I did worry, because I knew that tone, the one that said you wouldn't understand, so don't ask. So I started saving files, quietly, carefully. I built a timeline, cross-referenced invoices, matched payment histories, checked vendor addresses. One listed their office as a frozen yogurt shop in Montana. It didn't take long to connect the dots. Vincent was funneling money through ghost vendors, inflating costs, padding expense reports. Subtle, just enough that only someone deep in the project architecture would notice. Someone like me. I didn't confront him. Not yet. Instead, I consulted a lawyer, a sharp corporate whistleblower attorney named Teresa, recommended by a friend from grad school. She told me exactly what to do. Document everything. Create a trail. And most importantly, don't tip your hand until you're ready. So I built the file, time-stamped everything, then made 3 copies, one on a secure cloud server, one printed, and sealed in an envelope, and one on a USB drive that never left my bag. By the time Vincent stood up at my party with that smug little grin and his time to go speech, I already had my finger on the trigger. He didn't even know it. Lunch, I walked across the street to a coffee shop I used to love before late nights stole my free time. Hannah met me at a corner table, worry tight across her face. "I still can't believe he did that," she said, barely touching her sandwich. "Publicly, like you were some intern who messed up a spreadsheet." "Vincent's never been subtle," I said, stirring my coffee. "He wanted it to hurt." "Why didn't you say anything?" she asked. "You just smiled." "That scared him," she added. "He looked totally thrown." I smiled faintly. Silence unsettles men like Vincent more than outrage ever could. She gave me a look. "You're planning something, aren't you?" "I'm just preparing for my exit," I said innocently, "making sure my house is in order." She raised an eyebrow. "Do I want to know?" I looked out the window. "Probably not, but you'll find out soon enough." After lunch, I returned to the office and printed a clean, professional transition report. Every project I'd worked on, status updates, key contacts, passwords, everything they'd need to keep things running without me. It wasn't generosity, it was contrast. When the storm hit, I wanted one thing to be absolutely clear. I did everything right. I left no mess. I left no trace. And they still chose to humiliate me. That afternoon, I received an automated calendar invite from HR Final Exit Interview. Friday, 3 p.m. Neatly slotted in like I was just another file being deleted from the system. What HR didn't know was that by 3 p.m. Friday, the system itself would be in question. Vincent had chosen Friday to clean house. I had chosen Friday to burn it down, and the fuse had already been lit. Friday morning arrived like any other. The city stirred with its usual rhythm. Traffic, coffee carts, elevator dings. But the air felt different, charged, like a storm brewing under clear skies. I dressed with care. Black blazer, gold earrings, deep blue blouse, calm before the storm. The elevator ride to the 21st floor felt longer than usual, even though I'd taken it 1,000 times. But this time I wasn't going to work. I was finishing what I'd started. People nodded as I walked in, half smiles. A quiet tension hung in the air. Rumors had started the day after the party. Nobody knew what had happened, only that something had. Even Vincent had gone silent, communicating only through his assistant. By 9 a.m., I was at my desk, sipping coffee, organizing the final pieces. The transition file was bound. The USB drive with financial data sat in my purse. The sealed envelope, addressed to the board's ethics committee, rested in my top drawer. At 9:15 a.m., the first sign came. Vincent stormed out of his office and slammed the door hard enough to echo across the floor. Red-faced, jaw tight. He barked something at his assistant and vanished into the stairwell. I didn't need to ask. 10 minutes earlier, the board had received an anonymous tip. Names, dates, wire transfers, supporting documents. The kind of tip that couldn't be ignored. It came from me. A secure email, untraceable to my work account, with one final note. I trust the board will know what to do with this information before legal authorities need to be involved. Subtle enough to stay internal. Strong enough to make them sweat. By 10 a.m., the company's general counsel had arrived. Barbara. I'd only met her twice. She didn't handle day-to-day, she handled crises. Vincent hadn't planned for a crisis. At 11 a.m., I was called into an unscheduled check-in with HR. Denise smiled stiffly as I walked in, fingers laced too tightly. "Kelly," she said, "thanks for coming. We just wanted to check on how you're doing, with everything going on." "I'm fine," I said calmly. "It's been a productive week. We want to make sure you don't feel like this decision was personal. Your termination is part of a larger restructure." "Of course," I said. "Just business, right?" Her smile twitched, but her eyes were different now, not warm, not apologetic, cautious. HR could always feel when something was coming. They just never knew where the fire was until it reached their feet. I gave them nothing. Polite, cooperative, professional, because that's what made it burn more. By noon, I was back at my desk. Vincent was nowhere to be seen. Office dark, assistant gone. Slack was buzzing. Did Vincent get called into a board meeting? Why is legal here? Something's going down. They were right. At 12:45 p.m., I got a text from an unknown number. "We received your report. Please do not leave the building before speaking with our committee representative, Board Compliance Office." I stared at the screen, then locked it. They had it. The report was in motion. At 2:30 p.m., I walked into the conference room for my exit interview, the one Vincent had so smugly arranged. But Vincent wasn't there to see it through. Denise was already seated. No smile this time. Beside her sat a tall man in a gray suit. Serious. Silent. He looked me in the eye. "Kelly," he said, standing. "James Price, internal counsel for the board. I'd like to ask you a few questions before we proceed with your departure documentation." "Of course," I said smoothly, taking a seat. "I'm happy to answer whatever you need." He didn't smile, just opened a folder, pulled out a single printed page. One of my attachments. Stamped confidential. Time-stamped in color. The fuse had been lit. And now the explosion had begun. The silence in the conference room was so thick I could hear the ticking of the wall clock, 1541, behind me. James Price, the board's internal counsel, didn't waste time with small talk. "We've reviewed your report," he said, voice even, controlled. "What you provided is extensive." I nodded. It needed to be. Denise from HR sat frozen beside him, hands clenched in her lap. This was no longer an exit interview. This was a legal pre-briefing, and she knew it. James continued. "Several of the financial documents you included suggest serious breaches of fiduciary duty. Some could constitute fraud, if verified." "They're already verified," I replied calmly. "Check the audit trail on our internal system. I made sure everything was time-stamped and recorded. The files I sent weren't my opinion. They're the company's own records." He regarded me for a long moment. I met his gaze without flinching. "What do you want from this, Kelly?" he asked finally. "I don't want anything," I said, folding my hands on the table. "I'm leaving today as planned. I have no interest in dragging this through the media or destroying the company." "Then why send it?" "Because if I hadn't, no one would. And because people like Vincent shouldn't get to crush careers for sport and walk away untouched." Beat of silence passed. James nodded once and closed the folder. "We appreciate your discretion," he said. "The board will begin an emergency investigation immediately. We've already placed a freeze on Vincent's financial authorizations and begun a deeper audit. We'd like you to make yourself available for any follow-up questions over the next few weeks." I stood, slinging my bag over my shoulder. "You know where to find me?" I walked out of the conference room with the same composed stride I had entered with. Only this time I wasn't just the woman being shown the door. I was the one who had opened it and let the truth in. By 4 p.m., the whispers were no longer whispers. Someone from accounting leaked that Vincent had been escorted from the building. Not by security, not yet, but quietly, through the parking garage, under the pretense of a personal emergency. But it wasn't personal. It was official. The executive floor was locked down for internal meetings. Legal was crawling through his office. Emails were being pulled. Devices were being collected. And the staff? They were buzzing. What happened? Did Vincent get caught? Is that why Kelly looked so calm all week? I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. People started connecting the dots themselves, the way Vincent had blindsided me at the party, the way I hadn't reacted, the way I kept showing up every day, cool and composed. By 4:30 p.m., Hannah slid into the seat beside me at the office cafe. Her eyes were wide. "Vincent's gone," she whispered. "Like, gone. They're wiping his email. Nobody's saying anything, but I know," I said quietly. She blinked. "Wait, you knew?" I looked at her. "You asked me if I was planning something." Her mouth dropped open slightly. "Holy shit, Kelly. What did you do?" I smiled faintly. I told the truth. At 5 p.m., I packed up my things. Not in a cardboard box. In my sleek, everyday work bag. No drama, no spectacle. Just a quiet walk to the elevator. And when I stepped in, I felt something shift, like a weight finally lifting from my shoulders. But before the doors could... "Close," a familiar voice called out. "Kelly, wait!" I turned. It was Barbara, the general counsel. She stepped into the elevator with me, holding a folder. "I wanted to catch you before you left," she said. "The board's meeting late tonight. We're initiating a formal misconduct investigation into Vincent. What you provided is likely to trigger SEC reporting requirements." I said nothing, letting the silence speak for itself. She handed me the folder. "This is a formal notice of whistleblower status. It protects you from retaliation. I know you're technically leaving the company, but if you ever want to return in any capacity..." "Thank you," I said, tucking it into my bag. "But I think I've already outgrown this place." She smiled. "You're probably right." The elevator opened on the ground floor. As I stepped out into the cool evening air, I looked back at the glass tower behind me. The place where I had given 7 years of my life, my energy, my ideas. The place that had tried to bury me with a smile and a party. But I hadn't been buried. I'd been planted, and now the roots of truth were beginning to crack the surface. By Monday morning, the storm had officially gone public. The news broke just after 9 a.m., buried halfway down a Financial News Digest, but impossible to miss. Internal investigation launched into executive misconduct at Stratwell and Company. It didn't name Vincent outright, but those of us who had worked there didn't need names. The phrasing was enough. Unauthorized financial activity. Whistleblower report. Board-initiated audit. Senior executive placed on immediate administrative leave. The article was short, clinical, but it was just the beginning. Inside the office, the mood had shifted. The same people who stayed silent the day Vincent announced my dismissal were now buzzing with energy. Slack channels lit up, gossip turned into frenzied speculation. And the name on everyone's lips, mine. I wasn't there, of course. I had no reason to be. My contract ended the previous Friday. I was no longer an employee, but I wasn't exactly gone either. By noon, I had received 3 LinkedIn messages from former colleagues. The whispers had become voices. "I wish I'd stood up for you sooner. What you did was brave. If you're planning anything next, I want in. I'm done staying quiet. You gave me the push I needed to leave too, thank you." But one message stood out from the rest. It was from a woman named Erica, someone I barely knew from another department. "Kelly, you don't know me, but I've worked under Vincent for 5 years. He took credit for my work more times than I can count. I thought I was imagining it. I thought I was crazy. But what you did, it proved I wasn't. Thank you." I stared at her message for a long moment, then typed back, "You're not crazy. You were just in the wrong system. Keep going." That was the moment it hit me. This was no longer just my story. It was bigger than me, bigger than Vincent. It was about every person who had been silenced, overlooked, shut down. People trying to do good work in a place that treated them like they were disposable. And now that place was cracking. By Tuesday, the board released an internal memo acknowledging serious lapses in financial oversight. Vincent's name was finally mentioned. He had been officially terminated, not resigned. That single word said everything. Later that day, Hannah called me. "They're overhauling everything," she said. "New policies, expense review, systems, ethics training. They even brought in an outside firm to audit contracts." "Sounds like damage control," I said, pacing my apartment. "It is," she replied, "but it's real this time. People are actually speaking up. I didn't say it aloud, but I felt it. I had been the first swing of the hammer, and I wasn't finished yet. While Stratwell scrambled to contain its mess, I was already in talks with 3 different firms, all aware of the news and all impressed by how I handled myself. One stood out, Alira Partners, a rising consultancy. The CEO, Naomi, reached out personally. During our Zoom call, she said, You held your composure through a takedown. You didn't make it about revenge. That's rare. I wasn't looking for revenge, I told her. I was looking for accountability. There's a difference. She smiled. Exactly what we need here. We've been building a leadership program for women in strategy. I want you to help lead it. By Thursday, I had signed a new contract. Better pay, a higher title, and a leadership role that meant something. Alira gave me a private office, a voice, a platform, but the best moment came 1 week later. That Friday, Stratwell released a public statement. We acknowledge the valuable contributions of Kelly Harmon during her tenure. Her commitment to ethical standards and accountability has prompted significant organizational changes we are committed to upholding. It wasn't everything they owed me, but it was public. It was permanent. And for the first time in 7 years, they said, my name with respect. It wasn't just vindication, it was a shift. That afternoon, I stood in my new office, sipping tea from a real mug, not a break room paper cup, and I smiled. Because some stories don't end when the villain falls. They begin when the survivor rises. 3 months after the night Vincent toasted my promotion and fired me, I walked onto a stage I never expected to stand on, the Women in Leadership Summit. The hall was packed. My name was printed just below the keynote speaker, Kelly Harmon, former director, whistleblower, now partner at Alira. Backstage, I thought about how surreal the journey had been. Champagne to chaos, dismissed to leading change. I stepped into the spotlight as applause filled. The room, not polite applause, but charged. Real applause. The kind that says we know this story, or we lived it too. I was fired the same night I was celebrated, I began, in front of the same people who raised their glasses for me minutes earlier. Gasps, nods. People leaned in. I told them everything, carefully. No names, just the truth. I spoke of misconduct, humiliation, quiet planning. The difference between silence and courage, the cost of both. And I spoke about value. Too often, I said, we're told to be grateful, to keep our heads down, especially women, especially when we dare to reach higher. But gratitude shouldn't be a leash, and silence shouldn't be the price of survival. When I finished, the standing ovation was instant. It wasn't for me. It was for what the moment represented. Afterward, dozens approached, some with thanks, others with their own stories. One woman, a young project manager, pulled me aside with tired eyes. I've been documenting everything, she whispered. He takes credit for my work. He says I'm too ambitious, but after today, I'm going to speak up. I held her hand. You're not alone, I told her. You never were. Just be smart, be careful, and know your worth. Back at Alira, I debriefed with Naomi. She listened, then said, your story is spreading, not just in women's circles. I got a call from one of Stratwell's board members. They want help developing a real ethics program. The same board that let Vincent run wild. The very one. I'll meet with them, I said, but on one condition, which is, they acknowledge in writing the people they silenced, not just me, all of them. I want real reform, not lip service. Naomi grinned. I had a feeling you'd say that. As the city glowed outside my office window, I took a deep breath. I wasn't the woman who had walked into Stratwell 7 years ago, eager to prove myself to a man who saw me as disposable. I was no longer fighting for a seat at their table. I had built my own. And in the end, Vincent became what he tried to make of me, a cautionary tale, because he taught people how not to lead. And I showed them what happens when you refuse to stay quiet. Not all victories are loud. Some come wrapped in silence, documentation, and resilience. And sometimes the most powerful revenge is recognition.